Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today on our webinar that is the Retail Economic Update. Today I have with us Lee Holman from IHL, Jerry,
Howdy.
and I'm Greg Busick for those of you that don't know me. And we've got a lot of data as usual, so we want to get right to that. A couple housekeeping notes here. You will be able to ask questions down in the little bar that they provide with GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. You're going to be able to see a questions bar. You can enter your questions in there starting now or anytime during the presentation, and we will do Q&A at the end. As always, for our clients, for the forecasts that we share, that data will be on the portal and will be updated as of later today, latest tomorrow. And all of the slides that you're going to have here are going to be on our website no later than about 3 hours from now. So if you just go to ihlservices.com, that data should be up there, and those slides will be up there, and a link to the recording as well. So with that, one more thing to talk about. If you guys like these webinars, the next opportunity that we have is our inventory distortion, our out of stocks, overstocks study. The deadline for sponsors is actually tomorrow for that, if you'd like to be involved. And we will be having that in mid-July. So if you're looking for leads, this is a great opportunity for you to be involved with that. So reach out to myself or Jerry, Greg at ihlservices.com or Jerry at ihlservices.com, and we can get you all the details related to that. So with that, let's start with an update on the COVID-19 data. If you followed any of our webinars, you've seen that we've kind of walked you through how to go through data that's being presented by the mainstream media versus what's really happening out there. Just 3 quick charts. Once again, the data continues to be misrepresented in the media to incite fear or not adjust by population here. So if you look at this data, it shows that the US is still way farther than Western Europe for things, but it generally fits the narrative of fear. What's the actual data look like? So on the left side, what you've got is a view of the daily confirmed cases by million there, and you can see the curve. So if you were to look at what the US curve is, it's this brown line right here. So nowhere near the peaks and nowhere near the top one here overall. As you look at some of the other players, the big green bar, that is Belgium there. And once again, nobody mentioned Belgium in the news at any time regarding things. So really fascinating to see that the United States continues to drop all the way down here in terms of the deaths per 100,000 inhabitants there, but you wouldn't know it from our news. So what's a good source to go get the latest information and what's really going on? This is the data as of 3 a.m. this morning from the COVID tracking project. This is on Johns Hopkins site. You can go to the link I've got down here at the bottom, and you'll see that the number of tests are going up dramatically. The number of positive tests continue to go down as a percentage of things. So Memorial Day, we had 5.4% as our 7-day moving average. Today, we're now at 4.6% as things have opened up. So everybody was afraid there was going to be this big blip because all these about 150 million people could start going to restaurants and get out in our country, and that's simply just not happened. There's some pockets that have occurred. I know in the state of Tennessee, if it wasn't for prisons, nursing homes, and I'm missing one, meatpacking plants, our number of tests would be almost negligible, very, very low in comparison. So the fears of this huge spike of tests as more tests came about and things opened up really has not occurred. But don't ask the media about that one. So what's the economic impact of this? So when you look at some of the stuff, so this is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. It's out of France, and it looks at their projections as to what a single hit scenario would look like and versus what a double hit scenario would look like. Personally, I believe their data is a little optimistic on the double hit scenario should that occur. Here's the data by country. wanted to bring to your attention, they predict that a double hit to France and Italy will be far more devastating, excuse me, in Europe than it would be in the US. Um, Only going from a 7.3% GDP hit to an 8.5 GDP hit. Um, I think if there's going to be a second wave, I don't believe we're going to be shutting down the economy again there. But I also believe there's going to be parts that are going to shut down, and the hit's going to be bigger than 1.2% over what it was. I think that's a little optimistic view of things, but just gives you a forecast outside of our own of what people are saying from a world economy standpoint. So let's talk quickly about different regions of the world and how they're attacking things and what their April and May sales were. So in the EU, there's an $826 billion stimulus plan. They're distributing $500 billion to the member states, and they're making $250 billion available for loans. Now, there's other things that individual countries are doing as well. And you can see there's different impacts dramatically by different countries. Germany by far been the least impacted, with sales down only 6.5%. They were forecast to be down 14.3%, so they actually were better than the forecast were there. In France, retail sales were down 31% overall in April. UK total sales are down 8.9%. The main thing to look at, though, is the UK by far leads Western Europe and the US when it comes to e-commerce sales. Now 30.7% of total retail sales for the year in the UK are now online sales, which is by far, it's way higher than what we're seeing anywhere else in the world. Italy down 26%, Spain down 31% for the year through April. Those guys are really, really hurting in comparison to the rest of the world in terms of their economy, and they're desperately looking for tourists to come back to their countries. Asia Pacific, China spent 560 billion, or about 4% of their GDP, trying to prop up the economy there. Their May retail sales were off 2.8% after being down 7.5% in April. So not too bad when you consider the fact that they're supplier to the world, and a lot of the money from coming in from the rest of the world has not been there. In India, we're still looking for peak infection rates coming to India. They were slower to get COVID, and they're still very much in lockdown in a lot of cases there. They've dropped, their retail sales have dropped about 120 billion US dollars, which is pretty huge for India in 10 weeks of the lockdown. So they're really facing a really tough situation where the overcrowded nature of most of their cities and places like that really creates a tough situation for COVID. But fortunately, the amount of excess heat that they get will also hopefully help kill this a little bit more there. Japan has spent almost as much as the US in stimulus plans in total. Their sales for April were down 11.5% for the year, and compared to the United States, they're down 18.5% on their retail sales there. South Korea is actually positive for the year. They just announced their third stimulus plan, but their April retail sales were actually up 3.9% year to year. So South Korea has really been the gem in this entire thing, and from an economic standpoint. When you look to Latin and South America, they're still just now getting into the throes of what's going on. Colombia really hit because of the tourism, and particularly for expats from the US. Colombia had been a hotspot for expats to retire to, and a lot of those folks came back because of concerns regarding healthcare during this pandemic, and that is dramatically hitting the numbers of retail sales in that country. Brazil, a lot in the news about their infection rates. Their retail sales are down 16.8% year to year in April there. And once again, Mexico is paying you to fly down there. If you want to go to Cancun and Cozumel, they'll pay for the flights for you to come down there. They're desperately looking for that tourist dollar to help their economic view there. In North America, we've got some encouraging data from states reopened. We're going to go through a lot of that data here. Lee's going to go into detail on that. We still have the concerns for breakouts in the second wave. The recovery is radically different by state. New York is entering into almost their 4th month of being shut down here soon. They're just opening up their state now in the city. Hit very, very hard. Certainly the riots and the civil unrest that have come from the racial tensions and other groups that have come in and incited things there has really hurt inner city retailing in particular. Particularly African American owned businesses are down about 40% more than what you're seeing in white owned businesses in terms of the impact. And part of that is due to the fact that even though things could open up in certain communities, they got hit harder. But it's not just in those neighborhoods. It actually, you know, I know here in Nashville, the people downtown are begging protesters to go somewhere else so that they can survive for their businesses there. So the civil unrest and riots is really starting to hurt recovery in our inner city area hit. And certainly travel has been hit very hard. The U.S. Hotel occupancy rates are at 40%. They've raised to 40% here in the U.S., but they're still only 20% in Canada. As we've mentioned before, the small businesses are getting hit the hardest. We are projecting 313,000 store closures as a result of COVID and lockdown behaviors there by the states, proportionally hitting the small businesses. So we're expecting, you know, 9 to 10% of total small businesses are going to close in retail as a result of the pandemic here. And although we're going to have some hits to the larger chains, they have several advantages that the smaller guys do not have during this time. Once again, by segments, as we've shared this data before, we've got our food, drug, convenience, and mass merchants are seeing an increase of stores. The biggest impact is our general retail for our enterprise customers, which is we're projecting a 28,000 store reduction. That compares similarly to our friends at Coresight. I think we're a little more bearish on closures than they're showing when it comes to GMS and enterprise there, and about 10,000 restaurant locations, enterprise restaurant locations are going to close as a result of COVID and restrictions. As we've mentioned, this has turned into the most significant transfer of wealth we've ever seen in retail, from the general merchandise and hospitality segments to the food, drug, or essential retailers. They're upwards of 285 billion worldwide, and most devastating to small businesses, the sporting goods stores, the clothing stores, they have not been able to be open in many locations, but your Walmarts, your Targets, your Krogers, who also sell a lot of those products, could be open. And so we've had this massive shift of wealth, upwards of $250 billion we estimate that is moving from small businesses to large businesses here as a result of things here. States, once again, are not being hit the same. They're getting hit, some are getting hit harder. I'll skip through this for the sake of time, but just to go through, this is our estimate on the number of time shut down over a 4-month period. And this is based on the percent of opening for each one of those. So we had 25% open, 50% open, 75% open, or 100% open over a 4-month period. How long each of these things were going to be open there. And as you can see, states like Michigan and Illinois, New York, California, and Washington State have the longest lockdown periods, but also will see the biggest impact when it comes to their sales related to that. So 10 states represent 63% of all store closures. And what's crazy about this, particularly for my friends in Illinois, who have been locked down for a very, very long time, as you look at the COVID numbers are actually worse in Illinois in terms of growth than they are in a lot of the states that have been opened up before. there, which from a standpoint of justifying lockdown doesn't make any sense. But once again, that data is manipulated and played different ways depending on where you live and how things are in play. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who's going to talk more specifically about what's going on with retail in the U.S.
All right, thanks, Greg. Real quick, one of the ways that we at IHL try and look at data in terms of the retail industry is according to retail segments, and you see those on the left-hand side of the screen here. And these correspond with the NAICS codes that the rest of the government uses. For instance, it's 445 for food, 446 for drug, cosmetics, and personal things, and 722 for restaurants. And there are subcodes to that to delineate between the types of restaurants, the types of drug or cosmetic stores, and so forth and so on. The data that you're looking at here comes from the U.S. Census Bureau, and they put out a monthly report on retail sales. The way in which they get their data is they survey retailers, and then they extrapolate that data across the various retail segments to get a total for the year. So for what you're looking at here is 2019 compared to 2018. Overall, retail sales were up 3.5% from 2018. And remember, 2018 was a monster year. Retail sales were up about 5.5% for that year. So what you're seeing in terms of the retail segments, the food, drug, cosmetics, and mass merchants and so forth, they're up between 3 and 3.2%. The ones that are really hammered here for this past year, for 2019, were especially soft goods. And remember, these guys were some of the ones that you had. If you were part of any of our debunking webinars, then you heard us talk about the fact that the biggest preponderance of retail store closures were attributable to a relatively small number of retailers. And typically those retailers, they had an issue with their business model. They had an issue with not supporting their stores. They maybe were overextended from cheap money and unsustainable number of stores, or venture capitalists were involved. For whatever reason, there were a number of soft goods retailers that went out of business. And so for last year, we saw sales decline about 5.5%. And as you see in some of the subsequent slides, they actually started to see a recovery here. But in addition, you see the restaurants down here near the bottom at almost 4.5% increase for the year. That's really, really big for them. And then in terms of non-store retailers, we're talking about e-commerce here. We're talking about catalog sales and so forth. They were up 13.1%. So really, really strong growth there. Now this next slide shows the data for February of this year versus February of 2019. And as you can see, now we've got department stores as being the only ones that have a negative number there. And everybody else is up really big. And for February, the retail sales were up 7.5% over February last year. And for January and February, all told, retail sales were up 6.5% over the same period last year. Those are really, really strong numbers, and that was cause for celebration in some circles. But also, we're looking at this could be a truly, truly monster year for retail sales. But then what happened? Well, COVID-19 happened. We're talking about mid-March, when lockdowns and store closures and things like that started happening. Shopping malls started closing. And that's why you see the really heavy negative numbers here for especially soft goods and department stores, because basically for half of the month, those stores were inaccessible to consumers. And you'll see some of the negative numbers here for convenience and gas. Part of that has to do with the fact that gas prices have actually declined almost 80 cents a gallon since the beginning of the year, but also has to do with the fact that people are driving a whole lot less with the lockdowns. Restaurants down almost 25%. A lot of that is focused on table service restaurants, some of whom had no curbside whatsoever to begin with. Quick service restaurants, they've done a better job of surviving, mainly because between 70 and 75% of the revenue typically comes through the drive-through, and that was essentially unaffected by the lockdown kind of thing. Food, grocery up almost 26%, drug and cosmetics, mass merchants up big time. Again, e-commerce doing very well at 12% growth. Here we are, the numbers for April, same comparison, April this year to April last year. And we've got more red on the left-hand side of that vertical line than we did for March. That's because at that point, lockdowns had kicked in a really, really, really big way, especially soft goods down almost 90%. That is really, really big. In a negative sense. E-commerce up almost 22%, food up 13%. You can see where people are spending their money. The restaurants are for the most part closed except for the QSR, the fast food guys. So the people are having to go to the grocery store to buy sustenance. As we move forward to May, things are starting to calm down just a little bit. You can see the red numbers are dragging back to the right a little bit, so they're getting closer to back to some semblance of normal. Pure play retailers, the e-commerce guys, are still growing leaps and bounds, and food and grocery is still growing in a big way as well. Mass merchants are coming back. They've got positive growth now, but you look at drug and cosmetics, they're still in the negative area. But wait a minute, drugstores are open, they're essential and all that. But remember, in the NICS codes, underneath drugstores and pharmacies, there are the personal items. So stores like Sally Beauty and some of the others, they were closed. They were locked down for a while. A lot of them are in shopping centers and in malls and so forth. So there's been a big impact there on the negative side. Now, this is a different comparison. This is year to date for 2020 versus 2019. Retail sales are down 3.2% compared to last year. And this is the red stuff on the left side there, again, especially soft goods, is really, really big negative number there for them for all the reasons we've talked about already. Restaurants minus 22%. They are coming back as some of the table service restaurants have developed curbside type service. Remember, some of these guys already had it in place beforehand, but a lot of them were caught completely flat-footed here. One of the guys that's done a really, really good job, and I'll just call him out because it's a place my family loves to eat, Texas Roadhouse. They've done a great job with their curbside service. Again, non-store and pure play, the e-commerce guys, they're up over 16.5% for the year. Now, this is the same data, but now we're looking at it just a little bit different take on it. What we're looking at is the monthly growth compared to last year for each of these retail segments. And so you see on the left-hand side in January, we see all of these guys up in a positive sense. These are the food, drug, mass merchants and supercenters and C-stores, the FDCM retailers as we refer to them. These guys were all up positive in January and February, and that was a good thing. We were excited about that news. But then as COVID-19 happened, then all of a sudden some things started to change a little bit. If you look at the blue curve, that's food and grocery. They're up 26.9% in March. That's a really big jump. But it makes perfect sense because this is where people were going to get their food. This is where people were going to get their supplies and so forth, just to maintain a standard of living. Going through to May here, they're still up over 14% over last year. The green bar there, that is mass merchants and supercenters, the same kind of thing there. Big bump in growth there, and they're up almost 8% for the year. If you look at drugstores, you see the good positive growth up through March, but then you see the big drop off. Again, this goes back to what I was saying about Sally Beauty and Sephora and the guys like that. They were locked down for a long time, and it's only some of them are only just now getting back on their feet. The really funny part of it, well, not funny, haha, but really interesting part of the curve here is for C stores. You can see there at the beginning of the year, they're up almost 10%. And then there's this just steep decline. Again, gas prices are down almost, well, actually over 80 cents per gallon over the beginning of the year, and people have driven a whole lot less during this past 3 or 4 months here. So that's why you see the curve down where it is. Gradually, they're starting to come back. Gas prices are popping up just a little bit in certain areas. So we're expecting that to make some headway going forward. Here's the same kind of curve for GMS. We're looking at the hard goods in the red curve there. Good strong growth at the beginning of the year, but then COVID-19 happens and the decline begins. At this point, they're down 4.3% over last year. We expect them to be the quickest recovery for obvious reasons. Soft goods, real steep declines here. That's they're just having a tough go. But the combination of having the stores closed up, not just the self-standing stores, but also the ones that are sequestered in malls. So they're starting to make a comeback, but it's going to be a while before they get back to where they were at the beginning of the year. Department stores, likewise, been pretty heavy decline here, and they're down over 25% for the year. Now, here's part of what's going on as a result of all these things. What you're looking at is two different sets of curves. The blue curve has to do with the lowest income quartile. Okay, so this is the bottom 25% of income earners in the country. And the dotted line refers to what their spending was last year in 2019. And as you can see, up through the middle of March, it pretty much tracked right on. But then COVID-19 happened, and there's the dip for 2020. That's the solid line that you see there, the solid blue line. The dip happened, and things were moving forward a little bit up until the mid-April, and then they started coming back again. And as you can see in the after May 26th here, we see that their spending is essentially back where it was a year ago. So they've recovered to a certain degree. But understand something, they have less discretionary income than the higher income folks. And so the vast majority of what their spend has been on has been sustenance, the food, the groceries, that kind of thing. Switching to the green curves here, we see the higher income folks, same kind of thing, tracking fairly well with what we saw up until mid-March, and then a huge, steep, big fat decline here. And gradually it's been moving northward a little bit, but still a big separation between where they were last year and where they are right now. This has to do with the fact that all the specialty stores were essentially locked down for, beginning in the middle of March, as well as the restaurants, because those folks have more discretionary income. They can spend it on things other than just plain old sustenance on a regular basis. So that's part of the disparity you see between those that are the highest income and those that are the lowest income. Here we have, going back to the same kind of family of curves that we saw before, here's restaurants. Now understand something. What you're seeing is a combination of table service and quick service restaurants. When the Census Bureau releases, does their initial release of data, they combine the two. And it takes about a month to a month and a half for them to get to a point where they can actually separate out the two different types of restaurants there. So what you're looking at is the restaurants, and then COVID-19 happened and a big decline starts. But what we see is a good recovery here, not just because the QSRs have remained open for the most part, and they've been doing a great job with their drive-through and so forth, but now a lot more of the table service restaurants have developed some form of curbside, and they're getting better at it. So we expect that recovery curve to improve as we go forward. Here's some details from NPD Group. They track about 70 different kinds of restaurants, and what they're looking at is the same kind of recovery curve that we showed just now. Here, this is just for quick service restaurants. Again, they declined down to about minus 40%, And up to this point, or at least as of May 24th, the data was down there about minus 17%. So they're recovering in a pretty decent manner there. For full service restaurants, this curve looks a little different. Decline is all the way down to minus 80% in late March and early April. And at this point, they've clawed their way back up to about minus 40%. It's going to take them longer to recover than for the quick service restaurants. Again, we've talked about the e-commerce, retail, and so forth and so on. These are the numbers that that the Census Bureau has provided for monthly sales growth for this year. Those are truly astonishing. I mean, 7.1 is a big number increase over the previous year, but then we're looking at 25.3 in May. That's really astronomical when you're actually looking at the numbers here. But again, we're talking, that's, you know, in the overall scheme of thing, that's still down in the 12, 13, 14, 15% of all retail range. Okay, so it's not it's a big part right now, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still less than 20% of all retail. When we're looking at you know, now this is actually transaction data. It comes from the U.S. Commerce Department. Remember, I mentioned that for the Census Bureau, they do a survey of retailers and they extrapolate that data out to get what the whole industry is doing. These guys work the other way. They actually take the transaction data and make estimates about what's actually going on here. And if you look at, I'm assuming you can see the light gray band there. Everything north of that light gray band is positive from last year. So if you see non-store retailers, the e-commerce guys, 12.8% last year, 17.8% this year, you know, a 5.0 basis point change. That's really, really big. Grocery stores, big change there. Building materials, you know, your Home Depot and Lowe's and guys like that have been doing, you know, great business over the course of the past few months. General merchandise, your dollar stores, your mass merchants, and so forth and so on. You know, good step, a good healthy step up there. Vehicles and parts. Now this one's interesting to me because for the most part, IHL doesn't track automobile sales, but we do focus on the retailers that are involved in there in terms of AutoZones and O'Reilly's and people like that. We track those guys, and there are people that are spending a lot more money in terms of you know, do-it-yourself repairs on their cars because, you know, in the case of guys, you know, they haven't been able to go to the office, so they got to do something around the house. So I think that's part of the explanation there. Interestingly, sporting goods up a point from last year, and part of this has to do, I think, and this is a home and family thing. It's cruiser bikes. I've been trying for 3 months to find a cruiser bike for my daughter, and I haven't been able to get there yet. Going forward, as you know, we've had this kind of chart here in the last several webinars, and as we've moved forward, we've been adjusting numbers as we you know, receive more data from various sources. So this is our current forecast for overall 2020, what we're expecting for the year. Bottom line, retail in North America, we're expecting to be down 7.6% compared to last year. Some of the adjustments that we've made here, on the positive side, food and grocery, we've increased that from 11.5%. For department stores, we've increased their decline. I know that's a weird way to say it, but it used to be minus 29%, and we bumped that up to minus 23%. So that's a good thing on their side. Hard goods, we bumped them up to -5 from -10. Mass merchants, we bumped them up from 7%. So that's good growth there. And for QSRs, we've bumped them up to -9%. They were down at -13. Some of the ones that are really struggling, though, we're looking at in terms of the especially soft goods, they're at -33 now. We had to increase them from -21, and that's probably the biggest impact that we're seeing on the negative side there. long story short, the lodging and things related to entertainment, those are still down in the -28 to -35 range, and at least for the time being, we think they're going to stay there. We're hoping that some of the negative numbers in the upper parts decline some. In other words, they get better. They move more towards zero and maybe even positive in some cases. But it remains to be seen. Well, bottom line for FDCM retailers, as we look at the lower part of the page here, FDCM retailers remain, our estimate remains positive for the year. GMS retailers are going to be down about 12.6%, and hospitality is the one that's really going to be hurting at -24 and some. So with that, I guess this is my last or next to last slide, I forget. This is the recovery curve, if you will. We've shown this a couple of times before. Basically, the overall number is the light blue curve there, and we're showing the dip in the middle part of 2020, and we're showing recovery to 2019 levels happening. It looks like fourth quarter of 2021. Our hope is that it happens before then. When you look at some of the given retail segments, the FDCM retailers in orange there, they're already ahead of the game, and we expect that as this year moves on, their growth will decline somewhat, not in a negative sense, but just to get back to a normal growth for as things return to normal. The ones that are really struggling though is the GMS retailers, the department stores, and the green curve there. You'll see there's kind of a hitch there in 2021. That has to do with a slowdown in the recovery, because we think there are some retailers in that grouping that simply will not make it through the end of the year. So the recovery of those guys is going to take a lot longer to get back to 2019 levels than any of the other groups there. And then, of course, restaurants their recovery is going to be fairly quickly, driven mainly by QSRs. And with that, let me hand it off to Jerry.
Thank you, Lee. And hopefully you guys are able to see my screen now. So yeah, I wanted to run through, as we kind of close out the last section of our presentation, kind of run through and look at both operational and technical impacts. And as we think about technical impacts, really your technical impacts, think about them as accelerants. I was on with a client yesterday and we were talking about some of the trends that we were seeing, and with regards to technology implementations, with regards to certain retailers going out of business, and more than anything, with many of these technical things, that COVID-19 has just made things happen more quickly than maybe some folks would have liked or would have anticipated. And from an operational standpoint, some very strange happenings that we're seeing now when we walk into stores and we walk into restaurants. Obviously one of the most glaring changes is mask. Just about every retail or hospitality location you walk into, you see employees with masks. Though it was pretty interesting. Last night I had to run to my local Home Depot to get a part for my lawnmower, and the gentleman helping me in the nuts and the bolts section, he was not wearing a mask. So yeah, I think retailers are for the most part requiring masks of their employees, but it looks like some retailers are allowing some flexibility there. Of course, hand sanitizers and wipes, especially in high touch around carts and baskets. If you've been to a Sam's or your local grocery store or the like, you've more than likely seen an employee just dedicated to wiping off baskets. Stickers and signs, my goodness, I mean, can you even go into a retailer today and not see a 6-foot sign, stand 6 foot away? You walk into the store and right there on the door, you see all these signs talking about kind of policies and good practice, etc. It's just very, very pervasive, in both retail and hospitality. Freezers, coolers instead of open access. So you know, in many of the grocery stores around here, you know, instead of picking up your eggs from this open refrigeration, now it's behind doors. Instead of sticking your hand into a cooler with ice, that those things have been removed in convenience stores, and you have to get your soda from from behind the glass cooler. Opposites of this, there's opening lock cases for some categories due to racial sensitivities. Historically, we've kind of looked at, loss prevention, asset protection has looked at certain categories as high theft. And based upon the data associated with the theft occurrence, has said, hey, we need to lock these down. And now we're kind of starting to see where that's viewed in a very negative light, and retailers are starting to rethink some of those policies. And it'll be interesting to see what happens, to see, do we see a spike when we take the lock cases out of the equation, or is that just going to be part of this new normal that we're all living with? I live in close to Walt Disney World, and we have Downtown Disney, which is their outdoor shopping area, which was just opened up a couple of weeks ago. And from some friends that have been to Downtown Disney, what they were telling me is that all the merchandise, if you want to look at a piece of merchandise, an actual store associate will pick up the merchandise and show it to you and twirl it around for you to look at. So at Disney, and in many of the locations at Downtown Disney, they're limiting access to actually touching the product. And so will that be pervasive? And then who hasn't seen, the changes in plexiglass? I mean, if you were a stockholder in plexiglass, you're doing better than if you had been invested in Amazon, since March. A 3,000% increase in the use of plexiglass. And this really interesting note from this company, this plexiglass company, they were doing business. They were doing about $100,000 a month back in March. And then when COVID-19 hit, they're now up to doing $4 million a month, which is crazy, crazy, crazy. Again, when I was in my Home Depot last night, they're even at the self-checkout. They basically have these plexiglass cubicles that you get into to complete your purchase. So, it's funny. I think I first saw this in March. I had to go get a battery, and my batteries plus bulbs, it almost seemed like I was walking into a bank where you had the teller glass, there, which we're used to in banks, and now at the batteries plus bulbs in March, you were interfacing through plexiglass. Renegotiated rents. I just saw an article yesterday or day before yesterday about Mall of America, and they've missed an interest payment. They've missed some rent payments, and we're really starting to see this all over, where retailers are saying, hey, we're not making money, so we're not going to pay our rent, and really having to work really closely with the landlords to renegotiate some of those terms. And then finally, training, onboarding, and rapid pay adjustments. We've seen, hazard duty pay, where especially in the grocery store space, where retailers have had to adjust the pay rates. And then the challenge that you come into is that, they're bringing on a lot of employees due to the rapid uptick. As Lee kind of went through and talked about, these bumps in revenue. You don't have these bumps in revenue without additional employees to support that. So you have to train them. You have to have the systems to onboard them, and then you have to have also the systems that can make these adjustments in pay to follow HR and corporate policy. So it's really caused a lot of pressure, I guess, on some of your back-end IT systems from an operational standpoint. Next, we kind of want to talk about technology and the impact. I mean, most of the folks on here really have an interest in technology, so we would be remiss to not talk about technology and labor savings. So one of the things that we're seeing in labor is that we're seeing, not only did I just mention this, Walmart, Kroger, Amazon, pick your grocer, they're adding hundreds and thousands of jobs. And what's happening is that they're also bringing in technology at the same time with these large number of jobs. So at some point, what's going to happen is that, we're going to get back to normal. They're not going to need some of this labor, and they're going to reduce jobs. But in the middle of bringing all these employees and bringing in some of these new labor-saving technologies. It's what's going to allow retailers to do is basically kind of get a pass from unions, because the current light and the current focus is on adding the employees, and which obviously makes unions very, very happy. Self-checkout kiosk. I mean, probably many of you guys on the call are aware, saw the note that in a single store, Walmart is looking to do 100% self-checkout for all of their checkout lanes. We do a lot of business with the self-checkout companies, and the self-checkout companies right now are just having a hard time keeping up. There's such a massive interest in self-checkout, just due to, hey, I don't want to touch stuff. Can I create an environment that reduces human interaction? People are now becoming, where this tight human interaction used to be a big deal thing. Now it's reducing human interaction is what we're trying to move toward. Contactless payment, mobile payment shortage, move to mobile payments. And again, you guys probably saw that there's a coin shortage because people are using less cash. I think it'll be interesting to see where you've actually had certain municipalities say, as a retailer, you must accept cash. Now that the virus can be present on cash and can last for multiple days, will this be the impetus for some of those municipalities to change some of those policies and say, okay, cashless is safer, cashless is allowed? So we'll see. Kind of in that labor discussion is ESL. Historically, ESL has been very popular in Europe and not so popular. Unions really haven't liked ESL, and we really haven't seen the pervasive dispersion of ESL in North America like you see over in Europe. But this could definitely be an opportunity for ESL to see a real surge here in North America, where you're reducing the touch to product, you're reducing the touch to shelf, you're reducing the proximity of employees kind of real close to each other when you have to reprice stuff. Line queuing technologies. Retailers starting to now invest in queuing technologies, and I think this might even be an opportunity because to say, hey, is there a technology that we can use that not only will address the queuing problems that we're having, but also as whether a state is in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3, there are certain limitations on the shopper density in stores. So we'd gone to a TJ Maxx a few weeks ago, and you had an employee at the entrance and an employee in the exit that were queuing up people just to maintain those policies of what the shopper density in the store could be. So these queuing technologies potentially will allow labor to be allocated to something that's viewed as a lot more valuable. Voice, and I think again, we're so used to using voice on our phone, but we could take those same voice technologies and put them into the human the interaction with devices that we're used to, and reduce potential touch points. Workforce management solutions. I've mentioned this kind of on the previous slide, the pressure that we're having now on bringing a large number of employees, scheduling those employees, time off for sickness. So we're really seeing, for those retailers that have invested in cutting edge workforce management solutions, they're very happy. But for those that haven't, it's putting a lot of pressure on them, and they're having to go out and procure some new functionality that they didn't have previously. Software adjustments to eliminate touching of surfaces. Again, what we're starting to see even in the self-checkout space, that companies are making changes to the buttons that you would normally push, and the credit card interactions, to reduce the number of times that a person needs to touch actually a hard surface. And then finally, of course, cloud-based solutions, which have been growing like crazy the last several years. And if you were on, I think it was a webinar from about a month ago, we talked about the growth in cloud-based solutions, and we only see this as a massive accelerant to cloud-based solutions because they allow retailers to be much, much, much more nimble in the bringing on of new technology very rapidly. Customer journey optimization, again, a white paper that in a webinar that we had from a few weeks back where we talked about customer journeys. We have more to come and more to be said on that. But you're even seeing companies like Staples. They're saying they're moving from their own delivery to Instacart. Again, I hate to keep bringing up previous webinars, but we talked about the returns problem a few weeks back. And what we're looking at right now puts this massive pressure on the returns process to make sure items have been allowed to sit for a while after being out in the population. And should they be resold? Can they be resold? Now with a lot of the relaxation of rules around guarding and locking down merchandise, it's going to continue to put even more pressure on the whole fraud process. And retailers are going to have to deal with that changing mix that we're seeing due to societal pressures. Certainly click and collect, we're seeing this massive growth, this real uptick in many fulfillment centers in the back of stores. And you have some of your bigger box stores, especially Walmart, most notably, they're investing very heavily in the whole mini fulfillment amongst other stores. For the store, this warehouse within a store concept. As we see more pressure on restaurants, again, we started to talk about, you have dark stores that have been really popular in Europe, and they had started to come to the US, even last year we were talking about them. Dark kitchens, we were kind of talking about it last year, but again, talking about accelerants. COVID-19 is going to be an accelerant to dark stores and dark kitchens, where you can have these multi-branded concepts pool their labor, again, especially as more stuff goes to online. We have less of a need for storefronts for restaurants, especially in larger cities where more people are interested in delivery. We're going to see this continue move into dark stores and dark kitchens. Kiosk towers for buy online, pick up in store, towers for return. Again, these types of technologies that we can bring in that reduce touch point from human to human are going to continue to be more popular. And again, you guys maybe have probably seen or utilized some of the towers done by Walmart. They're done really, really well, and very impressive technology. And the restaurant space, integration from delivery partners. Historically, a lot of restaurants would be, you would have an iPad or a tablet for your POS, but then you'd have to have another tablet for Grubhub and Uber Eats and any other delivery partner that you utilize. Now that's being integrated into, now we're seeing more POS players integrate those delivery partners directly into the application. Inventory related technologies, out of stocks are this massive problem, and we're huge believers in RFID. We'll continue to see this massive proliferation of RFID, we think, as it helps solve the inventory problem. And then you're going to continue to see this, AI has many flavors, but computer vision is absolutely one aspect of AI, and we believe we're going to see a significant uptick in computer vision to help with inventory, not only inventory in the store, but inventory in the warehouse. Increased robotics. If any of you guys have seen the videos from Ocado and their automated warehouse, as a mechanical engineer, they're a thing of beauty. Ocado and Kroger just announced their 6th fully automated warehouse. And again, if you haven't seen those videos, I encourage you to go take a look at those. Again, voice is another component of AI. Voice commands are now pervasive with our smartphones, and again, more voice technology is integrating with traditional touch technology, so that you're not having to touch things. And then finally, on the inventory slide here, optimization of transportation logistics partners, just this deeper dive, this deeper interrelationship between your delivery and your retailer to optimize that whole process, to take that 3-day to 2-day to 1-day down from order to fulfillment. And again, COVID-19 an accelerant for that. And then kind of beyond the stores, home infrastructure spending for knowledge workers. If when COVID happened, if you got moved from the office to home, and you tried to buy either a mic or a video camera for your computer, and you couldn't find one, exactly what we're talking about here. Cloud productivity suites. Again, Zoom has just absolutely exploded. You have these new suites because again, you have all these workers that are now moving from the office to the home, and we're having to have the technology that supports that. AI, machine learning. We're seeing, COVID has created some massive challenges with regards to forecasting. And some of the most impressive briefings that we've had over the last couple of months is forecasting companies and how they're using this, artificial intelligence and machine learning to bring and address to the forecasting problem to, one, do much better than a human is able to do, but also to take that decision time and bring that decision time down much more rapidly. Workforce management, we had mentioned workforce management being, some of the challenges and pressures that are being thrust upon workforce management now. And this really, it even rolls into and is extended into policy changes as companies are now beginning to evaluate, hey, do we have systematic racism or LGBTQ bias in our policies and procedures and how we treat people and our hiring practices? So they're really having to reevaluate those now to say, hey, what can we do better? It's kind of the things that have happened in our environment, in our world here in the U.S. over the last couple of months have shown an even brighter light on some of the problems that we have in society, and workforce management will play a huge role in helping to correct some of these injustices that people have experienced for a long time. And then finally, telephony solutions for routing customers. So again, instead of having employees working in help centers, now employees are having to work from home, so it's putting a lot of pressure on telephony solutions to be able to route those help desk support calls into people's homes. So with that, would like to kind of close it out here. I think we've taken in a few questions, and if you have any further questions, please type those in, and I'm going to switch it over to Greg, who's going to lead us through the Q&A. Greg.
Thanks, Jerry. First question is really for all of us. Although a state may be open for business or for consumers coming to it to actually create sales, and I think that vastly is different by state that you live in. I can say where I live in Williamson County, Tennessee, absolutely. The stores have been, the parking lots have been jammed. People are shopping. We've actually seen evidence of general retail stores, because of pent-up demand, in specialty stores and soft goods, where things have opened and you can go back into the stores, their sales are actually up on a month-to-month or a week-to-week basis from year to year in those locations. The biggest problem nationally is you have so many places that are still in curbside, and that's hurting things. What about where you guys live?
Oh, where we are? I mean, yeah. The Best Buy close to me is still appointment only. It's like, which I think is nuts at this point. But I mean, in terms of, Publix, Walmart, Target, those guys are pretty much wide open. There's still a line to get into Sam's Club. At least in the morning hours. Later afternoon, it's not so bad. But then, big deal for us with the Coral Square Mall, which is the big mall close to us, opened up last week. And so, at first it was just the shoe stores inside that were open, which I
it's really odd.
thought that was kind of humorous.
Everybody's running, so they need to be able to have new shoes.
Yeah. But then some of the specialty stores, the soft goods stores and so forth, they started opening up, and only a handful of the guys in the food courts were open at that point. So I expect those to gradually open up as the days go by.
Jerry, what about you?
Yeah, I think where I live in Central Florida, over on the East Coast, and we have a relatively low population density. Like where Lee lives, and even Greg, you guys are in a much higher population density than us. I mean, my entire county, we've got 75 miles of coastline and only 600,000 people in the entire county. So we have a lot of green space and national wildlife preserve on the here in this county. So things are pretty much more sparsed out. We didn't have a lot of cases. Thankfully, we didn't have a whole lot of folks that died from COVID-19. So it's allowed us here. Things have been pretty wide open. We were even able to go out and sit down and have Mother's Day dinner out in public. And I really can't think of any place that we shop at that's experienced closures. I mean, sometimes we'll go to Orlando and shop, and there's, one of the malls that's been pretty slow to open in Orlando, but for the most part, really everything, even from doctor's appointments, dental appointments, giving blood, eating out, shopping, it's been, for the most part, not really inhibited in any of our activities.
This next question was, I had made a reference to an article that I read regarding how inner city stores, and particularly there's a racial component to the lockdowns and the impact of things here. And what was the reference for that? It's actually today's New York Times. There is a article called "Coronavirus is Hitting Black Business Owners Hardest." If you email me, greg@ihlservices.com, I'll send you the daily briefing that I saw it in. But give you the actual data. This is according to between February and April of 2020, 17% of white-owned businesses were shut down during the lockdown, 26% of Asian businesses, 32% of Hispanic businesses, and 41% of Black-owned businesses, according to the analysis of current population survey by Robert Fairley, University of California, Santa Cruz. So refer you to that data there. The next question is in reference to the technologies, Jerry, that you shared. Are there specific segments that are impacted more likely to be buying the self-checkout types of technology, the self-service or the RFID, et cetera there? I'll just answer that for the sake of time real quick. Clearly self-checkout in the traditional places that you see self-checkout, it's just there's a move towards more self-checkout there and eliminating labor at the checkout lines, which is your mass merchants, your grocery stores. They're getting away with it because of all the added jobs that they are doing now. Long term, that will impact those jobs at the front end. For RFID, it's clearly the department stores and specialty stores, which are the big drivers there. Computer vision is most of your big lane stores are those who can't really take an RFID tag that way. Voice is all over the place. Some of the voice things, not only in the warehouse, but also with regards to pickup and order pickup, click and collect, those sort of things, particularly in the restaurants. If you look at a Chick-fil-A restaurant or an Outback Steakhouse and how they use voice, Olive Garden as well, to do all of those pickup orders. So that gives you some flavor there. Next question. CNBC reported, they had somebody on there that says up to 30% of U.S. malls are going to close by the end of 2021. What's your view?
Sounds like
No.
clickbait to me. I mean, if you go look at, again, if you believe our numbers, 7 to 10% of all retail and hospitality locations are going to close in this year, and then some of those will get recovered next year. So, 10% is a lot lower than 30%. And I always love it when they say up to. So, okay, yeah.
Yeah, 1% is up to 30.
You're hedging your bet, and then what's the basis of your analysis? I mean, I think, as I talked about, COVID as an accelerant, I mean, I think you're going to have some marginal malls that this is going to be an accelerant to, but I don't believe that 30% is the viable number. Again, maybe up to 10%, but not 30%. That's absurd.
Yeah, I think more than 10% are in trouble, but I'm not sure I'd go as far as 30.
Yeah, I agree.
This question, you mentioned voice interface for picking. What about adding voice to help with returns? Certainly that can help if necessary there. It certainly helps tremendously when it comes to buy online, pick up in store, or things that are not at the counter when people come in for e-commerce or click and collect. We see a 20% reduction in customer satisfaction rate when an associate has to leave the presence of the consumer to find an item. So that's a big one. And then the last question we've got here from Paul, where are you seeing interest in video engagement applied to the customer journey? Honestly, not seeing a lot of that right now, Paul, because of have you guys seen that anywhere in terms of video helping people, like live video?
I remember that Staples was doing a trial a year or so ago, but actively using it, I can't think of any location.
I have
I
not
think
seen.
I see it more on the floor at NRF than anywhere.
Yeah, I just haven't seen that. And honestly, with the infrastructure challenges that most retailers have faced, their standard helpline and returns line, they're not even answering those calls because they haven't figured out the routing of the telephony technology. I don't know of a single retailer that is doing video there. So you saying that Lowe's contractors and Pottery Barn and Alibaba just haven't seen it, haven't been doing the home remodeling projects there that would use it. So
Well, tell Paul I'll go to Lowe's and Pottery Barn today to check it out.
okay, sounds good. All right, guys. Appreciate you hanging on. For those that have hung on till the end there, and we thanks so much. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week and weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.